The fourth and final speaker in this session is Jonathan Day. I'm delighted to have him here today. He is Deputy Director of the Risk Assessment, Flood and Coastal Risk Management Team at the UK's Environment Agency. So continuing on with the theme of flooding. Jonathan is responsible for assessing current and future flood risk in England and advising on emergency management approaches to enhance flood resilience. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Right, so this is going to be about using flood risk information to inspire action to manage and reduce flood risk in England. Obviously, I work for the Environment Agency. For those who don't know, the Environment Agency's role with regard to flooding, we're an executive agency, part of DEFRA in government. We have a strategic overview of all sources of flooding. And we're the lead authority in England for managing the risk from main rivers and sea flooding. My role, I guess my mantra, is that our flood risk information should inspire action, so it should inform our decisions, it should inform the decisions of our professional partners and the public. And so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about how our work assessing flood risk fits into our wider strategy, how we want to use it, how we want to develop it, and how we want it to inspire action. So I'm going to start by zooming out. So this is our vision from our Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy, published 2 years ago. So our overall vision is a nation ready for and resilient to flooding and coastal change, today, tomorrow and to the year 2100. So a couple of things you'd notice immediately about that: it's long term. When we manage and invest in flood risk management, we need to do that in a way that recognises the long-term impacts of climate change, and also that we're talking about resilience and not just protection now. So it's not just preventing floods from happening, it's making sure that the consequences of flooding when it does happen are lower. And that, I think, is a bit of a journey. Actually, maybe we're at the start of that journey. Last week we had Flood and Coast Conference, which is a major part of our conference calendar, and the EA Chief Executive, Sir James Bevan, talked and actually made a little bit of a splash in the media about some of that, the sharp end of resilience. So he was talking about the potential need in the future to relocate some of our coastal communities. Perhaps a personal observation of that conference was that not everyone is ready to take that baton on yet. We still talk a lot about protecting people, and there's a shift that we need to go through, and having good information about risk is vital to making that shift. And I'm just going to talk. So not all of the ambitions are coming up on this slide, so I'll have to read through this. There are three ambitions within the strategy, and this is just to sort of illustrate that everything we want to do is underpinned by our understanding of flood risk. So under the theme Climate Resilient Places, we talk about the interventions that we make to manage flood risk, but we need to understand the impacts of climate change in those. The other two themes that are not going to appear on this slide, the second one is today's growth and infrastructure resilient in tomorrow's climate. So here we talk about preventing inappropriate development in the floodplain, and here we talk about other risk management authorities, developers, infrastructure providers making their own infrastructure resilient. And the third theme is a nation ready to respond and adapt to flooding and climate change. And here we talk about communicating flood risk, warning and informing communities. And it's just a really simple point here that everything that we do and that our partners do to manage flood risk in England is underpinned by the evidence and underpinned by our flood risk information. So where are we at the moment? We've been publishing flood risk mapping since 1999, and my summary would be that our current generation of flood mapping, you may have seen some of these products. in our gov.uk services. So we have a flood map for planning, which shows the natural floodplain. We have risk of flooding from rivers and the sea, risk of flooding from surface water. So you can go on there, put a postcode in and understand flood risk in that area. The technology that that's based on, it meets some of the aspirations of our strategy, but not all of them. So by way of example, when we talk to people, communities at risk of flooding, say, what sort of information do you want? They just say, well, we want to know if we're at high, medium or low risk and what to do about it. And broadly speaking, that's what the gov.uk service does. It will give you that kind of overall assessment, and it will give you some advice on what you can do about it. But in order to realise the full level of ambition in our strategy, we need a lot more. So, for example, we need to be able to visualise what climate change means. So our current National Flood Risk Assessment, NAFRA, is present day only, so it does not include how that risk will change over time. We need to know what happens if individual flood defence assets fail or are taken away. So that's a sort of internal question, perhaps more than a public question, but that's really important to us. And we need to know things like the depth of flooding at a given likelihood in a given location. And that's because if we have better information about flood depths, our understanding of the economic consequences of flooding is much better, and we can target our investment much better. So that's why in the national strategy we've made quite a big commitment, and we consider it a really important part of delivering our strategy, that we're going to produce a new national assessment of flood risk in 2024. We're not very imaginative when it comes to branding, so we're just calling it NAFRA 2 at the moment. But that's going to help places better plan and adapt to future risks from flooding from rivers, the sea and surface water. I'm going to do just a quick sort of overview of the type of analysis and the sort of use that we're going to put it to. But this is the very kind of high level overview, and it'd be great to kind of share a bit more about this in maybe 2 years' time when we've actually done it, because at the moment it's still sort of at the idea stage. But on the right hand side of this slide, these are the kind of outcomes that we're seeking by doing this piece of work. I think a really important thing to note is that we cannot achieve all of those, we cannot answer all of those questions that I raised with a single national model using single national data sets. So a really important part of our vision for NAFRA 2 is using local modelling where it exists. So over decades, we and our partners have spent probably tens of millions of pounds on local detailed modelling. So you might do a local detailed flood model to justify investment in a new scheme, or as part of development planning, or as part of a local strategy. Up until a few years ago, all of these models that have been built up over time were a latent asset. They were on hard drives or dispersed around the country. It wasn't information that was going to be brought into one place and be at practitioners' fingertips. So really what our vision for our new National Flood Risk Assessment about is recognising the value of those modelling assets and putting all of that information at people's fingertips, and that will enable us to answer much more detailed and specific and sophisticated flood risk queries. I'm going to talk about the sort of use cases of our new National Flood Risk Assessment at the moment, but this is just a sort of continuum. So we will be building an IT system around this, but there are a range of outputs, and sort of moving from the left to the right, it becomes more bespoke. So on the left-hand side, that's basically a better version of what we've got at the moment, so which will be accessible as open data, as is our current assessment, and it will be available through our gov.uk services. And moving through that, there are the more kind of bespoke queries. There are examples there about the sort of questions that would be able to give feedback on. with different levels of sort of bespoke handling or data processing. We're going to have an internal IT system to query some of this. Initially, a great vision would be making the whole thing available through a gov.uk service. That's probably beyond the level of ambition for 2024, but certainly, from the perspective of researchers and academics and people who are interested in getting much more sophisticated insights into flood risk, using the information that we hold from local modelling, over time, we're hoping to make more and more of that available. These are some of the use cases that have informed our work for 2024. And this highlights the question, well, what do we, as the Environment Agency, want to get out of a better national flood risk assessment? The first one is updated, richer information, a better version of what we already have. So for 2024, we'll be developing our gov.uk service. It's called Check Your Long-Term Flood Risk. And very simply, we'll adapt that so that it will show you not just your current day flood risk, but it will show you how that will change. You'll be able to visualise how that changes in the future through climate change, and it will be more accurate and detailed as well. So that will be the outward-facing information that will be better. But we're also doing it for some other really important internal purposes. So the second one here is a piece of work called Long-Term Investment Scenarios, LTIS. So this is a bit of an economic analysis for which NAFRA, National Flood Risk Assessment, is the input. And what it does is it runs a model which gives you a range of sort of different versions of future NAFRA in 50 and 100 years' time, what NAFRA might look like, based on different assumptions. So it's asking what-if questions. So it's giving you a future picture of national flood risk based on different climate change scenarios, different development scenarios, and crucially, it then uses that to analyse what would be the right amount of investment in managing that risk. So that's evidence that we use for policymakers in spending reviews and so on. It's a really important part of our business case for national investment in managing flood risk. And then thirdly, I think I mentioned before around asset management. The EA manages, I think, something like £20 billion by replacement value of infrastructure on flood risk management. We have quite a large maintenance budget. By having a national flood risk assessment that gives some much better information on the consequences of asset failures, we think there are millions of pounds worth of annual efficiencies to be had just from the maintenance budget alone. And that's before you get to the sort of use that a better national flood risk assessment will make to, for example, initial feasibility studies for new defences. So there are lots of sort of business needs and lots of business benefits, quite apart from the sort of public awareness benefits of having a new national flood risk assessment. So finally, just to conclude, I was going to circle back, because I've talked quite a lot about the internal business need around our flood risk information, but just to circle back to sort of the public engagement bit. So talked before about what people want. People actually haven't told us that they're particularly inspired by flood mapping. That just is that is what it is. One thing they have said is that information evidence of previous flooding inspires action with them. So this is another argument. We've got a whole I would say repository, but the point is it's not all in the same place. We've got lots of dispersed evidence, so photographs, videos, drone footage, all of that sort of thing, of things that have happened in different places around the country. It's all dispersed at the moment. But we're thinking about, can we do a similar thing to what we did with the flood model, the local flood models, bring it into the same place, sort of tie it into our gov.uk service, so that you don't just see an assessment of your flood risk in your place, high, medium, low, you also see some of this kind of real evidence of what's happened before, and that will make it, the theory is, of course, that will make it more real for people and inspire more action in the public. And I was just going to close with an alarming statistic on this, actually, because only a third of people in England who live in flood risk areas actually know about their risk. So whatever we're doing on the mapping and modelling sort of front, it's not quite working with the public. So perhaps a question to panellists and the audience is, if we're trying to build long-term resilience and inspire action to fight climate change, how can we better use the information that we have to bridge that gap of public awareness? Thank you very much.